If you've been online with what's happening around development and tech spaces, you may have heard the term vibe coding come up once or twice. And if you've heard that term come up, then you might have also heard that vibe coding is the future, or that vibe coding is revolutionary for development. Now, if you're a developer, keeping up with the latest news is important, so if there exists something like that that can benefit your development lifestyle greatly, naturally you may be inclined to use it. And for something like vibe coding, which can almost autonomously code entire complex systems for you, you may feel very inclined to use vibe coding in your next project. So picture me now. I've been developing games mostly by myself, creating assets and code tailored to each of my projects and their specific needs. It takes a lot of time to create those projects and the assets as well, and I've been doing this type of work for a few years now. And with vibe coding coming along, prospects of earning up to $10,000 a year from creating JavaScript-based games and services with vibe coding seem amazing, because instead of having to do all this work by myself, I can just let AI do the heavy lifting and direct all the results as I go along, which seems great. Too great. Is it really that soon that AI can take over my work and make better results than me? More importantly, is it even possible? Can AI really vibe code a better game than me? Well, that's exactly what I want to find out. In this video, I'll be putting my work against a 2D game idea next to the work of an AI's vibe coding of that same idea. And at the end of the video, I'll be comparing the results along with some general discussions about what the implications of AI are on creative work. Additionally, I'll also be basing this video around the Godot game engine, since as I mentioned, most of these vibe-coded games are done through JavaScript frameworks, which means that both me and the AI will have to use Godot to make a game by having decent understanding of the game engine, its capabilities, and GDScript. As for what AI or vibe coding thingamajig I'll be using, I've decided to use Cursor since it is one of the most popular vibe coding editors that I've seen get mentioned, and for extra assurance, I do understand that there are other vibe code editors out there which may have better interfaces or specific gimmicks, but almost all of these editors are based on VS Code. On top of that, the actual service provided by these editors is done so through the models that the agent of each of these apps has access to. So it's likely that there's almost no difference in the meat of these apps between one to another if they both rely on the same models, as the only difference would be in how the interface functions and whatnot, which is very, very minuscule. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into the game idea. I have the actual game idea here on screen if anyone wants to look at it and read into it, but as a quick summary, it's just a 2D wave survival game with a pixelated art style and cave story inspirations. So to start off, I'll be taking a crack at this idea first, and my process is as follows. My first steps were to create a prototype, since that means I can implement and iterate upon game logic quickly as per usual, which means that I implemented all of the ideas in this doc step by step. And since this was a new project for me, I tried to be more optimal by using classes and whatnot to group similar functionality, and I used Godot 4.4 with as many of its new improvements and helpful quality of life features that it introduced. So looking at the first part, controls, things were pretty simple. I basically just messed around with some export variables for speed until I got something that I liked, and I implemented variable jump height and quick turning to make the controls feel more tight and comfortable. The only thing I ended up missing was coyote jumping, which is basically just a short timer where you can still perform a jump after falling off a surface, but the controls still turned out good. As for weapons, they were also easy to implement as well, as after I implemented the handgun, I could duplicate that same behavior for the shotgun by adding a spread pattern, and I could also duplicate that same behavior for the assault rifle by making it just shoot handgun bullets rapidly. The only custom weapon behavior that I really had to make was for the grenades, which were simple rigid body 2Ds that would have velocity applied to them based on the global position of the mouse cursor. And I actually would have fully made the knockback behavior of these grenades if not for my friend Jeff's help, as he provided a custom behavior out of interest of seeing my project, which used radial distances for calculating the knockback velocity the player would receive. So big thanks to Jeff for that, as he really made the knockback behavior for these grenades feel a lot better in the end. Note that this doesn't necessarily discredit anything, even if it wasn't my contribution, because his work is still human in the end, so it's still contributing to one large human work in comparison to what the AI will do. Anyways, the next thing I implemented was pickups, and these were pretty easy to do as they were just area 2Ds that added to player values, not much to say here. The unlocks I think have slightly different behavior, but they still inherit from the class that I made for these types of objects, so not much difference. As for enemies though, the bat enemy I implemented was based off of this enemy that I saw from the cave story beta that retains velocity while bouncing off of walls while trying to home in onto the player. So I recreated that and it was pretty simple. And because I wanted to use a similar behavior for the fairy enemy, I also copied it over to that class, but just changed the speed values around to make it have more precise movement compared to the bat. Also, I gave it a projectile that fires out almost every 3 seconds with no collision for extra difficulty, and lastly I added a worm enemy. But because I didn't want to make an actual segmentation system, I basically gave it a large hitbox with a CPU particles 2D node to mimic the look of a 2D worm enemy with multiple trailing segments. Just imagine the worm enemies from Terraria, but only similar in look, not function. Anyways, with all the enemies done, it was now time to put them all together into a wave spawning system. And I really don't remember the specifics of how I managed to pull it all together, but functionality wise, all you need to know is that there are spawn points all around the level, and RNG basically chooses how many enemies spawn in a wave, how long the wave lasts, what type of enemy gets spawned, along with other reward related factors. And now, with the prototype finished and some ironing out, I was ready to make the assets for everything. There's not too much I can say on this process besides the fact that I made the sprite work in Ace Sprite, kept the sprite art for enemies simple, made the sprite work for weapon UI based off of Cave Story's beta inventory guns, made most sprite work 16 by 16 pixels, reused graphics where optimal, used a font under the open font license that looks similar to Minecraft's one because I liked its legibility, look, and uniformity, made the music for the game in OrgMaker with panning for a cleaner mix, and made 2 variants for the in-game music so you can distinguish when you're in and out of combat. And that's all. I decided to name the game Chasm for fun, and I released it a few days ago on itch. In total, although the project may seem small, it took me around almost 20 hours to make, and it matched the vision I wanted precisely: a fun, stylized 2D wave survival platformer. As for AI or vibe coding, I'll be using the terms interchangeably, the results were quite different, to say the least. Because most AI services rely on remote models and processing, I had to sign up for an account, which was fine since I'm not really sharing any useful data that this software could use to improve itself, but once Cursor finished installing, I selected the Gemini model since that was free, and I basically just told it to follow the game ID as a prompt, and it got to work quickly and confidently. The way that Cursor worked is it basically just took my idea and kept writing and giving commands for me to approve, which was easy, but it did struggle a bit in the beginning since it seemed to work from some weird relative directory that I had unclear access to, as it hallucinated a bit while generating the folder structure for my project, and later on it didn't even put the code in the proper places. It did figure out what it was supposed to do eventually, and things got faster from there. Because of just how fast it kept iterating on the prompt, I didn't really pay attention or understand what it was writing, but I did see some similarities in structural execution and variable names, which may or may not be a positive, but interesting nonetheless. Another interesting thing is that Cursor decided to generate its own tscene files at first, instead of having me interact with Godot directly, which was impressive. And even though it stumbled over its feet a few times trying to generate some code, it managed to generate it all, and I had a fully functioning project over the course of about almost an entire hour. Is what I would have said if the tscenes were not completely broken with incorrect UIDs and minor issues in the code. And it turns out that even though I let the AI regenerate the tscenes in every possible way it could, it managed to mess it up every single time, and eventually it just had me manually create the tscenes following its instructions, which I expected, but that begs the question, why did it hallucinate these broken tscene files instead of having me just make them in the first place? Was that really reliable? Well, these assets sure were. I tried to generate the graphics using Gemini Studio, as I heard that it was good for making sprite sheets, but when I tried it, yeah, it was just not game ready at all. So I just used this weird AI generated SVG that Cursor made for the icon, the SVG image, and called it a day because even if I could make the AI assets cohesive, that's not really my job in this part. I'm just here to author the process. And author the process I did as I generated some commercially licensable music on Mubert. Which was inoffensive, and some sound effects on 11 Labs, which were, oh, wow, they were beautiful. So beautiful, in fact, that they were definitely game ready, and I let Cursor add them in the end, and this was the result. If I have to be honest, outside of my subjective opinion, there was very little direction with this. AI pretty much took about the most general direction you could take for a project like this and still managed to leave issues in it. And even though AI took about 2.5 hours to complete the project, which could have been advantageous had I worked alongside it creatively, even code-wise, the results were still unauthored. Like, why does the game over not work properly? How would I even begin to understand this undocumented generated code? Would it not just be better to make it myself in the first place? I understand that technology could improve in the future to make this sort of work better, like maybe next year making games in Godot with Cursor, vibe coding, or any sort of AI software should be better than this year. But I think the takeaway is that AI has not reached that sort of general efficiency for everything as a quote-unquote artificial intelligence that's trying to do everything for its consumers, especially when you consider how biased some of the companies are who make these AI, as we're already starting to see some signs of pollution in datasets for models, like with ChatGPT having this consistent yellow coloring in its image generation. It's just not looking viable right now, and when you consider the perspective of complete creative direction, like a real director who directs a movie and has actors who follow specific instructions, that's just not happening right now. And I think that kind of says a lot about what AI truly is. Because honestly, when you truthfully consider what AI is, it's just a misnomer. What AI actually is just models. And we've had models in different types of apps for years now. YouTube uses models for automatic subtitle generation, and a local example of this is with Kdenlive, where you can go into the app, find the model source, and download an 8 megabyte model to generate captions from speech fairly accurately, completely on device. And it's efficient. One example of these sorts of techniques can be seen in the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie from 2018, where they used machine learning to predict how a library of hand-drawn lines would be projected onto the edges of a 3D model. And this is awesome. But the issue is that even though there are practical examples of models being used, they're getting lumped in with AI in general, and when you discuss these models on their own, practical merits, people may associate that you're not just talking about these models anymore, you're talking about AI as well. And under a generative context, this can be a big problem because of the practices of companies like OpenAI, Google, and Cloud, which are completely different to that of specifically engineered use cases like in the Spider-Verse movie. And this is a big problem, since the associations of AI that these companies give us should be separated from the models that we see in these practical contexts. Because it's imperative that as users, we understand that these companies see us as consumers who can be sold the idea of these AIs that do everything possible. Which leads us into the bigger picture. Is AI good, or is it bad? Well, I can't really say. On one hand, AI as a product is a complete lie. We're just being sold LLMs, large language models that hallucinate to try and produce the best possible results for us consumers. But on the other hand, even if AI is just snake oil, it is producing surprisingly practical results. AIR is just one example of that, as even though it may not be usable in a game context, it can produce some surprisingly acceptable results. Is that good? Bad? I don't know, I personally don't care, because the work I make is for myself and my friends. So I don't care if AI makes better work than me, nor do I care if anyone inputs my work for its datasets because, well, I don't think it's worth it. And similar issues have existed before AI came to popularity, like it has now, anyways. But it definitely lacks that author, that individuality that we see coming from a lot of human-made work, and that's what I think of AI. There are a lot of other implications and issues that one may recognize from AI and its effects, but looking at it from a creative perspective, it's just kind of there. It's not really useful for my personal work. I don't want to apply it, and I don't see anywhere where I could apply it, so I just don't use it. Maybe it'll make my life harder professionally, but AI is just kind of primitive to me. It's not ready for my work. I managed to make a game I wanted and AI couldn't, so if I was a real paying customer for something like Cursor Pro, I'd probably be pissed I got this instead of this when I asked for it. And I think that's where AI stands for game development and creative work in general. Obviously, subjectivity is subjectivity at the end of the day, but AI wasn't able to make the work I wanted. And as long as that's the case, I don't think I'll be looking at it seriously or viably like some people do with their vibe-coded JavaScript framework games that make $10,000 a year. How reputable is that anyways? Well, I don't need to know. I made the game I wanted, AI didn't. And so that's the end of this video. I guess the issue was that I used Cursor and not AbsoluteVendingMachine to make a game this time, and well, I won't make that mistake again.